New Zealand has always been vulnerable to natural hazards, including volcanoes, earthquakes, cyclones, tsunamis, land instability, severe storms, and flooding. The Maori were the first to arrive in New Zealand sometime between 850 and 1250 AD. They named New Zealand Aotearoa, meaning land of the long white cloud. Maori legends tell of many disasters such as tsunamis, volcanic eruption, and earthquakes. The Maori practiced disaster mitigation by building their villages high up, often on ancient volcanoes. They terraced the mounts and erected palisades for protection from enemy tribes. They also dug kumara pits in which they stored up food for the leaner months of the year. These food stores also provided some protection against famine. And some archaeologists believe that Maori filled in the pits each year and dug new ones to prevent disease. This model of a typical pā shows how the land was terraced and the palisades or fences were erected. Some of the rooftops would have been dwellings, but the ones that are very low to the ground covered the kumara pits. The first European settlers arrived in New Zealand about 600 years after the Maori arrived. They were mainly traders, whalers, and missionaries. Land wars began over Maori land being taken by the Europeans. The Treaty of Waitangi was signed in 1840 by Maori chiefs in Great Britain, and New Zealand became a British territory. The treaty provided the Maori with property rights and government representation. New Zealand Maori and Europeans began to work together peacefully and to build the nation and government. The eruption of Mount Tarawera and the Napier earthquake were historical disasters that contributed to the early formation of emergency management in New Zealand. The eruption of Tarawera buried 6 villages. The famous pink and white terraces, which you'll see in the next slide, were completely lost in the eruption, and Lake Rotomahana was buried. Rescue parties of able-bodied male volunteers set out from nearby Rotorua at daybreak. They found many survivors, and at least 2 victims were dug out alive. There were between 108 and 120 deaths. The 1931 Hawke's Bay earthquake led to complete devastation in the cities of Napier and Hastings. There were 256 confirmed deaths. The Navy ship HMS Veronica had just berthed in Napier Harbor that morning, and when the sailors saw what was happening, they radioed for help from Wellington. The sailors assisted local firefighters and citizens with the rescue effort. Before Mount Tarawera erupted, the pink and white terraces on the shores of Lake Rotomahana near Rotorua were considered one of the wonders of the world. Tourists came from far and wide to soak in the thermal hot pools and view the pink and white silica terraces. In 1968, a severe storm hit New Zealand, and the passenger ferry Wahine sunk, causing the deaths of 51 people. Public criticism brought discussions about the deficiency of civil defense, and policy changes, including better communication and warning systems, resulted. In 1988, Cyclone Bola hit on March 5th and continued until March 10th. It caused significant flooding and landslides, but only 3 deaths resulted. There were hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. In the aftermath of the storm, New Zealanders worked to implement better flood management and soil conservation policies. New Zealand's civil defense has its roots in Britain and the United States. In the mid-1930s, as war was imminent, New Zealand adopted some of the same air raid protection and civil defense plans already in place in the UK and the US. The first New Zealand organization was the Emergency Precautions Committee, who were concerned mainly with air raids and gas attacks. They trained air raid wardens and other volunteers in first aid and firefighting. In 1987, New Zealand became completely nuclear-free, thereby greatly reducing their risk of nuclear crisis. Under the Civil Defense Emergency Management Act of 2002, CDEM is a function and responsibility of regional, district, and city councils. Consequently, all local authorities throughout New Zealand have joined together on a regional basis to form CDEM groups. These groups, in partnership with emergency services and other organizations, are responsible for emergency management locally. There are 14 CDEM groups throughout New Zealand. Participants in the CDEM sector include local and regional CDEM authorities, personnel, and volunteers, national-level Ministry of Civil Defence Emergency Management, police, fire departments, St. John, New Zealand's Armed Forces, and NGOs including the Red Cross and Red Crescent and the Salvation Army. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation, and for further information, please refer to any of these references.